evidently we've got, is it Alisha?
Yes.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. You were going to explain why, from a scientific standpoint, you believe in a God?
Yes. I study a lot of theoretical physics, and I grew up in a family that I guess you would call them typical Christians, but in my opinion, I wanted to look deeper into the thing and figure out, well, what do I believe personally, and why do I believe it, and is there any kind of scientific basis for it?
Sure.
And I think that, well, for me and personally, I think that people get confused mainly about the whole God issue because in physics, the way it's explained, and there are a lot of theoretical physicists that are turning into believers now because of it.
The way what's explained? Because
the way that God is explained.
God isn't explained in physics.
In theoretical physics, it is.
What theoretical physics?
That every single thing comes from the void. The void is essentially a nothingness, and it's really difficult to wrap your mind around.
Okay,
the fact
I don't know what you're talking.
I'm not a physicist, although there is one in the room.
Right.
I'm not a theoretical physicist, but what I see happening, and I will let you finish to make the point, I promise, is when I say that physics doesn't address God or give a definition of God, which is what you implied, you came back with, well, theoretical physics talks about everything coming from the void and nothingness. Okay, that's fine, but how is that God? Because I've yet to hear a theoretical physicist say everything came from God as a physics explanation. I mean, if you're going to equate God and void or God and nothingness, I mean, that's your prerogative. But I'm wondering what this theoretical physics explanation for God is.
Yes, I guess if I'm understanding you correctly, what I looked at is, well, I looked at the latest physics research and the latest theoretical physics, and I looked at how people in the Christian world describe God. And when you get down to it, the void is the way the Bible describes God.
I don't remember that.
Which everything comes from the void. The void is nothingness, but that's where everything comes from. The void is sort of like every single possibility that there could be.
All right. First of all, setting aside this whole issue of addressing the void in physics, I'm pretty familiar with the Bible. I don't recall the Bible ever describing God as the void. If your only connection is everything came from God and everything came from the void, okay, everything came from Physicalsnop. I mean, I can put whatever label on it I want. But the Bible has while it's not very detailed in describing God, does describe God in ways that aren't consistent with the void, including, as a personhood with an intelligence, directing where you couldn't look directly on him.
Backside parts.
Yeah, you
that
could see the backside and not die, but the front you can't. I don't know how you get to the void.
Well, in the beginning of the Bible, it talks about everything coming from the void.
So the earth was void.
No, there's no mention of a void. I got one right here. In Genesis chapter 1, God creates everything, but he is specifically mentioned as anthropomorphic, including he comes down and walks around in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. He wrestles with believers. He acts and does things. This is not a void. This is certainly not a void in any sense that physics would describe.
Okay, that gets to my second point. Just like there are creatures in the world that are on a lower evolutionary scale than we are.
Wrong.
There are beings that
okay, stop, please.
No.
I went ahead and let you go into the second point, even though you didn't make any kind of a concession or acknowledgement around the first point, and Jeff would have had a field day with that. But there's no such thing as an evolutionary ladder, and there's no such thing as things being lower on an evolutionary ladder.
And you say that because?
Because it's true. Evolution isn't a ladder, it's more
tree.
like a tree. We are all equally evolved. We have just evolved differently.
Okay,
And by-
maybe
and
I
by-
misspoke myself then.
Well, we've evolved differently, but when you start implying a ladder and that things are more evolved or less evolved, that's just wrong. Mutation, random mutation, other causes occurs, and natural selection acts on it. And even if you were to define a scale of, let's say, some particular characteristic, speed or energy efficiency, what you'd find is that throughout evolution it vacillates. But it's pointless to try and look at this like a ladder or say that something's more evolved than something else.
Yes, I get what you're saying, but my point of view is more or less in the sense of not evolutionary as in the physical sense, but evolutionary as in the spiritual sense.
What's that mean? I should let you ask that.
Well,
No,
like
I'd already asked
you
it to the
have
last
people
caller.
who have ascended, which
Ascended?
that's higher on the evolutionary scale. Meaning you go literally from...
What does ascended mean?
Wait,
Who's done it and how do you
I-
know?
energy.
I think she's defining it. Wait, say that again.
When you go literally from the physical and you move into a purely energetic state from the material,
Okay.
that is
Example.
higher on an evolutionary scale.
Can we get an example of that?
Yeah, who's done that and how do you know?
An example how what?
Give me an example of something that ascends. Like, what are we talking about?
I mean, Daniel Jackson did it
A
on
person,
Stargate. But
for instance, that goes from being physical to being purely energetic.
I don't understand. Like who? Can you give me an example, like somebody I would know, or like has there? I'm just trying to picture what you're saying. What are you just like? What process are you describing?
I'm not describing anyone in particular because I can't go back and say, yes, this person ascended or no, they did not. All I know is that there are many accounts of people who have.
So when we
Whether or
see
not
somebody
they're true,
ascend,
I can't say that. But I know that in
it's a
physics,
claim.
theoretically, it's possible.
to convert matter to energy, yes.
Yeah, matter to energy conversion, you're right. Within physics, that's possible. However,
I think where we-
what you seem to be talking about when you talk about a conversion of matter to energy is that there's something about the personhood that remains, some kind of ascendancy would I think, if I'm understanding you, imply a soul or some sort of something of me that is still me continues on. That's not supported by physics or any science.
Certainly not medicine.
I mean, there have been claims, I suppose, of people who, first of all, you're talking about spiritual evolution and higher planes. You know, I'll ignore all the little trouble points and just go ahead and say, okay, if somebody ascended to energy, we'll go ahead and call that. It doesn't matter to me whether it's higher or lower. The fact is, what reason do you have for thinking that it can occur, does occur, or has occurred? And the only thing you came up with is that there were accounts of it, and you don't know for sure if they're true or not. Well, there's accounts
no, only because I wasn't there. I won't say something is true if I wasn't there. And there's no physical evidence saying that it can happen.
So you wouldn't say that the Holocaust happened?
Well, there's physical evidence showing that it did.
But you
and
weren't
you have
there.
people who had firsthand accounts. Now, that makes a difference. There's physical evidence.
Okay. So why? You said earlier that you knew that people had ascended, and now you've kind of backed off, and that's fine. I promise I'm not trying to dog you. I'm trying to get to the meat of this, and that is, do you believe that people have ascended or not?
I believe that it is possible. And that's all that I'm saying.
Do you believe that anything is possible?
My belief in God comes from a stance of possibilities, not necessarily concrete yes, no. It comes from mainly a field of possibility.
Very
What's possible, what's not.
So do you think fairies are possible?
Do I think what's possible?
Fairies.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
Why
At least
not?
that gives us at least a framework from where you're coming from.
it's possible, yes. I won't say that it isn't.
Do you believe
It's
in
hard
fairies?
for me to say that it is. I'm sort of in between you and in between someone who would definitely say something is possible.
I'm just-
Well,
I'm just
wait a
trying to
minute.
quantify. Go ahead.
I just have one question then. Would you say that you believe a God exists?
Yes, and purely on the the reason that I would say that is because of my personal experience. And that
Okay.
cannot be transferred to another person. So when someone else says that they don't, then if they haven't had a personal experience, I can't knock them for that.
No, I just want to make sure. So if I understand you correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that you are comfortable saying that you believe a God exists due to your personal experience. That would be your main reason.
Due to my personal experience and the fact that I believe that theoretically in physics it is possible.
But if we don't know what a God is, then...
But I didn't want to get into a lot of the other stuff that, that I look into or read or delve into or whatever. But a little bit of it would be the fact that I think people get confused by saying that something is God when it's not God.
But if we don't know what God is, how do we know what is God?
What I mean by that is you have beings that may be on a higher scale or higher level than we are that do things that we would think, oh, well, only God could do that. No, just somebody that knows more than you do.
How would anybody make a claim to say that God could do anything if we have no God to examine?
I wouldn't say that God exists in the traditional Christian sense. I would say that God exists as a void of all possibilities.
So this is
it
like
is
the strategy
humans
caller
that
from
bring
last
those
time.
possibilities.
I
into
agree. God
reality.
exists as a void.
Okay, now wait a
It is
second.
a vacuous concept
Are you
that
simply
gets nowhere.
Are you simply saying that God is then your model of all logical possibilities?
Yes.
Okay, so
And
that's what God
it's
means
the
to
human
you.
being that brings that possibility into being with their own mind.
So you think that human beings with the power of their own mind can bring possibilities into existence?
Yes.
Mental models.
So you're one of the people who enjoyed What the Bleep Do We Know?
Excuse me?
Never mind.
No.
There's a movie called What the Bleep Do We Know, which goes through this same nonsense of the human mind bringing possibilities into manifestation.
Oh, I'm not
I
sure
think
about
no,
that. I just read theoretical physics books, but I'm not sure what you're talking about.
I think, if I understand you right, all you're saying is that to you, God is the set of all logically possible items.
Yes, and I think it's the human that actually brings it into being.
What do you mean by brings it into being?
You can, as a human, you have the power to bring that whatever possibility into being. You have the power to do so.
Okay, so when you say that, do you mean bring it into being as a mental model?
Bring it into reality as a physical model.
Have you ever seen that happen?
Have I ever seen it? I've experienced it.
I mean, I guess on the one hand, what I think of when you're talking about... Wait, let me see. One thing that I can think of, like this pen, for example, at some point was a mental model that somebody brought into existence. So that would be an example of the process that I'm familiar with. In other words, someone thought of this pen before the pen was produced.
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
That could be part of what I mean, you could view it that way, but you could also view it as going from thought form straight into the material form.
I have no concept of what you're talking about at this point. I mean, I've never seen that occur.
But I cannot say that I am capable of doing such because I have not ever done anything like that.
I've never seen
I
anyone
just believe
do it.
that it's possible.
So, do you think
But
anybody's
I
done
plan
this?
on working on it to see if I can eventually get that to happen.
Do you think
Go for it.
somebody's done this?
Have I what?
Do you believe that somebody has achieved this?
Of course. I mean, there are
Why?
billions of humans.
Why do you believe that somebody has, by the power of their mind, managed to turn the possible directly into the material, real existence?
Because anything is possible, according to physics.
You believe it because it's possible. That's your only reason?
Well, I'm not saying that it definitely happened, but it's,
You just did
again,
say.
we're going back
No,
to
no,
the
no.
fact
You
that it's
are
possible.
saying it definitely happens. I specifically asked if you believed that people had done this, and your answer was, of course. Not it's possible. I asked if you believed it, and you said of course. And now you're saying, well, I didn't say they really could do it.
Well, it's hard to get into all of the theoretical physics involved.
You don't need to get into
where my
any-
answers are coming
You don't
from.
need to
but
get into any theoretical
I need to
physics.
let me
Go ahead.
just make one point here, and I just want to make sure that this is clear. What is logically possible has zero bearing on what is real. What is logically impossible has a great deal of bearing on what is actually real. Many things are logically possible that are not real. Just because something is possible does not mean that it has happened, that it is going to happen, or that it, is happening. There's a whole lot of stuff that's logically possible, or even physically possible. It doesn't mean it's happening or that it's going to happen ever.
I get that point.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear.
I just,
Does she have a reference?
I just think that when people start saying that God is a physical being that interferes in our lives on a daily basis, it strays away in my mind, it strays away from what I think the true God is.
well, now how can
Which
you
is
say
really
that? Because
within
Well,
us,
no,
and
she's
we're
saying
the
it strays
ones
away
that
from what
have-
she
it
thinks.
doesn't matter what she thinks. You also think that it's possible for people to bring these concepts into reality on their own. So these people who have the idea that God is a being who manifests and interferes with reality, surely you have to think that that's possible if they're doing it. I mean, you've got inconsistent positions there. What theoretical physics have you got, like a book recommendation for what I could read to be able to transition theoretical physics into theology?
Brian Greene is a good author, but he really mainly just talks about superstring theory. Let me see who is another good author.
It'd be nice. I tell you what, find one that you think really ties together your concept of God with actual physics, and email it to us. You can email tv@atheist-community.org.
Yeah, there it is.
And I'll read it and talk about it.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
I don't know. We've got like 18 minutes
No,
left.
let's do calls. It's
Yeah,
fine.
there's